The midday sun hammered Cedar Ridge like a punishment. Inside a roadside diner on Route 9, a woman stood frozen at the counter while the card reader beeped its rejection for the third time. Laurel Bennett, CEO of Bennett Agricultural Holdings, keeper of a 9-figure portfolio, couldn't pay for a $12 meal. Donovan Booker watched from 2 spots back in line. He recognized that silence, the kind that presses down on your shoulders while strangers study the back of your neck. He set his last 20 on the counter, told the cashier to keep the change, and headed for the door. He had a job interview ahead and no gas money left. He'd figure it out. What he couldn't know, was that the woman he'd just helped was the same woman who had signed his termination papers 3 weeks ago. Before we go any further, if this kind of story is what you come here for, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New stories go up every week, and you won't want to miss where this one goes. Donovan Booker had not always been the kind of man who walked 3 miles in 90-degree heat. There had been a time not so long ago that he couldn't remember it, but far enough that it felt like someone else's life when he wore a hard hat to project sites and presented irrigation schematics to county engineers and drove home at the end of the day with something that resembled purpose. He had been good at that work. Not just competent, good. The kind of good that came from caring whether the math was right, whether the pipes held, whether the water actually reached the roots of things that needed it. Then Renee got sick, and then Renee died, and the version of Donovan who wore the hard hat quietly stopped showing up. He came back to Cedar Ridge because it was the only place left that felt like it belonged to him. His parents' peach farm. 8 acres of red Georgia clay and fruit trees his father had planted before Donovan was born. He took a maintenance supervisor job at the Bennett Agricultural Processing Plant on the edge of town, not because it matched his credentials, which it didn't, but because it was close to Mila's school and the hours were predictable, and nobody expected him to care too much about anything. Mila was 9. She had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of going quiet when she was thinking hard. She knew more about soil moisture and drip lines than most adults in Cedar Ridge because Donovan had been teaching her. Not as a lesson, just as something to do together on evenings when the house felt too empty and the stars came out early. On those evenings, Donovan worked on the controller. He'd started it as a distraction, something to keep his hands busy at 2 in the morning when sleep refused to come. A solar-powered irrigation controller that could read ground sensors and distribute water based on actual soil conditions rather than a fixed schedule. For small farms, for families who couldn't afford the commercial systems. The kind of technology that could mean the difference between a viable harvest and a total loss during the dry stretches that hit Georgia harder every summer. He designed it to integrate with Cedar Ridge's existing water coordination network, the same municipal grid that connected private farm irrigation to the town's reservoir gate, allowing flow to be managed centrally during drought restrictions. He spent 3 months calibrating the prototype against that network, running live tests through Mila's old tablet so she could track the field data for a school project. The tablet logged every command that moved through the network inflow rates, pressure readings, gate control inputs, and stored them locally, because Donovan had wanted Mila to be able to review the data even when she was offline. He never filed for a patent. It didn't cross his mind. He was building it for the same reason he built things in the evenings with Mila, because it was something real he could do with his hands. Graham Pike had been watching. Graham was the plant manager at Bennett Agricultural's Cedar Ridge facility, and he had spent 20 years clawing his way into that position from the bottom of the maintenance floor. His father had farmed 40 acres outside of town until the bank took them when Graham was 14. Too small to compete, his father said the night he signed the papers. Too small and too slow and too late. Graham had made himself a promise standing in that empty kitchen. He would never be his father. He would never be the man without leverage. When he found Donovan's controller schematics left on a workbench one Tuesday afternoon, pages of precise hand-drawn diagrams, he understood immediately what he was looking at. He also understood that Donovan had no lawyer, no patent attorney, no institutional protection of any kind. Graham photographed every page and said nothing. 3 weeks later, a primary pump in the facility's processing line failed catastrophically. Graham had ensured it would. He filed the incident report himself, citing evidence of deliberate tampering, and named Donovan Booker as the responsible party. The report included a reference to missing equipment tools that Graham had relocated to a locked storage unit on the far end of the property the week before. He also submitted footage from a portable camera he had positioned near the pump corridor 3 days earlier, not part of the facility's official network, angled carefully to capture a figure whose build matched Donovan's, but whose face was never clearly visible. Combined with the access log showing Donovan's key card near the area that evening, it was enough to look like a pattern without being possible to verify. The report went up the chain to Atlanta. Laurel Bennett had been CEO of Bennett Agricultural Holdings for 11 months. She had taken the position when her father suffered a cardiac event during a board meeting, and the vote of succession happened before anyone had time to think carefully. She was 38. She had an MBA from Emory and a decade of operational experience in commercial agriculture. And she had spent every one of those 11 months aware that at least 3 members of her board believed she was temporary. She did not have the luxury of hesitation. She had learned that early. When the report from Cedar Ridge came across her desk on a Wednesday afternoon sabotage theft of company property named employee Donovan Booker, she read it in the 15 minutes between calls, confirmed that Graham Pike's signature was on it, and signed the termination authorization. She had not spoken to anyone in Cedar Ridge directly. She had not pulled Donovan's personnel file. She had not asked whether there was a second opinion. The decision took her less time than lunch. The drive to Cedar Ridge from Atlanta took 2 hours on a good day. Laurel had planned to arrive unannounced, assess the facility's operational losses firsthand, and return by evening. She told no one she was coming. She wanted to see how the plant ran when leadership wasn't watching. She made it 40 minutes outside of town before the rental car's engine light came on, and the vehicle rolled to a stop on a 2-lane road with no cell signal and no shade. The diner was 1.5 miles on foot. She walked it in heels she should not have been wearing, and arrived with dust on her ankles and the look of a person managing not to show how far outside her element she was. She ordered coffee and a sandwich. She handed her card to the woman behind the counter. The machine beeped. She handed a different card. The machine beeped again. Her bank had flagged both transactions as geographically anomalous. She was 40 miles from the nearest city and had not told her accounts she was coming. There was a logic to it that did nothing to help her. The line behind her had 3 people in it. She could feel all of them. She was still searching her bag for cash she already knew wasn't there when the 20 appeared on the counter. She looked up. The man who had placed it was nodding to the cashier. "Cover hers," he said. "Keep the change." She started to speak. He looked at her directly, and she saw the quiet in his face. Not unkindness, not pity, just a settled calm that belonged to someone who had already made the decision and wasn't waiting for her approval of it. "It's okay," he said. "Just pass it on when you get the chance." Then he was out the door. Laurel watched through the window as he crossed the gravel lot. No car. She watched him reach the road and keep walking, hands in his pockets, in the direction of nothing obvious. The sun was direct, and there was no cloud cover. "Donovan!" the cashier called toward the door. "Sir, you left your hat!" She held up a worn baseball cap. The door was already closed. Laurel set her cup down. "What did you say his name was?" The diner had a Wi-Fi router behind the counter. It gave her enough signal to make the call. She had her assistant pull the file before she finished her coffee. Donovan, Marcus Booker, maintenance supervisor, Cedar Ridge facility, employed 14 months. Prior to that, 12 years as a hydraulic systems engineer with 2 different firms in Atlanta, both of whom listed him as eligible for rehire. The performance reviews from his 14 months at the plant were consistent, thorough, reliable, problem-solving instinct, above grade level. Works well without supervision. The sabotage report had one signature on it, Graham Pike's. No independent witness statements, no co-signature from the safety officer. The footage gap was attributed to a camera malfunction that had never been logged through the standard maintenance system. The clip Graham had submitted showed a figure whose face was never visible and whose presence near the corridor proved nothing on its own. There was also a project file internal opened 2 days after Donovan's termination listed under Graham's name. The schematics inside weren't Graham's. Laurel had read enough engineering documentation to recognize when a drawing style changed mid-document. These had changed. She paid for her meal with cash her assistant brought from the facility and drove to the address in Donovan's personnel file. The Booker farm was 8 acres of peach trees and worn fence line on the south edge of Cedar Ridge. The house was a wood frame structure with a covered porch and a rain gauge mounted on the railing that someone had clearly built by hand. A child was crouched beside a well near the garden, filling a bucket slowly. Donovan was in the side yard with his back to the driveway, pulling parts off an old tractor. Not inspecting them, separating them, setting them in a row on a tarp like items organized for sale. The girl saw Laurel first. "Hi," she said, direct and unsurprised in the way of children who have learned early to read a room. Donovan turned. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. She watched something move through his expression recognition, then something harder and more careful. "I know who you are," he said. "I know you do." Laurel held her ground at the edge of the yard. "My name is—" "I know your name, Ms. Bennett." He turned back to the tractor. "I know your signature, too." She let the silence sit. "The report had problems," she said. "The footage gap wasn't logged. The clip doesn't show a face. The schematics in Pike's project file aren't his." She paused. "I should have looked before I signed and I didn't. I'm sorry." He set a piece of metal down on the tarp with deliberate care. "You drove out here to apologize," he said. "I drove out here because I need you to look at our pump system," she said. "And because you deserve to hear it in person." She told him about the planned shutdown, the old pump infrastructure the board had approved decommissioning as a cost reduction. The timeline that put the cutoff in the middle of harvest season. Donovan finally turned fully to face her. He looked at Mila, who had gone back to filling her bucket with the patient focus of someone who had done this many times before. "If those pumps go offline in August," he said, "the Harmons lose their peach crop. The Delacroix family loses their corn, probably 6 or 7 other operations within 3 miles of the water table feed point." He paused. "You know that." "I do now," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the tractor parts on the tarp, a row of components that represented money he was trying to find somewhere. "I'm not coming back to save the company," he said. "I'm not asking you to. I'll come back because those families can't afford to lose a season." He set the wrench in the toolbox. "You and I are going to have to be clear about what this is and what it isn't." "Agreed." He nodded once, the kind of nod that means the conversation is over and the decision is made. "Monday morning, 6 a.m., and I need access to the maintenance records Pike filed in the last 6 months. You'll have them." He turned back to the tractor. Laurel walked to her car. Behind her, she heard Mila's voice, quiet and matter-of-fact. "Is she the one who fired you?" A pause. "Yeah," Donovan said. "Is she going to fix it?" Another pause, shorter. "She's going to try." Monday came with a heat index of 104 and a sky the color of old bone. Donovan was at the plant gate at 5:58. He had a thermos, a notebook, and the expression of a man who had decided to do something difficult and was not going to discuss how difficult it was. The security officer at the gate, a younger man named Dale who had worked under Donovan for 9 months, looked at him with something between relief and guilt and said nothing except good morning. Inside, the reception was less clean. The maintenance floor went quiet when Donovan walked through. Not the polite quiet of people who were busy, the deliberate quiet of people deciding how to react. 2 men he had trained personally looked away. A woman from the processing line stood near the far wall watching him with crossed arms and a closed expression that said she had already made up her mind. Graham had been working the floor for 3 weeks. He had told anyone who would listen that Donovan's return was personal on Laurel's part, that she had run into him somewhere, felt guilty, and let sentiment override judgment. That it wasn't about evidence because there wasn't any new evidence. That a CEO who made decisions based on roadside sympathy was a CEO who couldn't be trusted with a facility of this size. Some people believed him because it was simpler than the alternative. Some believed him because Graham had been there 20 years and Donovan had been there 14 months. Some believed him because they had seen the damage from the failed pump station, and someone had to be responsible, and it was easier to keep the name they'd already been given. Donovan did not try to win any of them over. He went to the maintenance records room, sat down with the files Laurel had authorized, and started reading. Laurel stayed out of his way through the morning, but by afternoon she was on the floor with him, and a junior engineer named Travis, the only staff member who seemed genuinely uncertain about who to believe, walking the pump infrastructure and asking questions. Not questions designed to demonstrate authority, questions because she didn't know the answers, and the answers were necessary. What is this valve control? What happens downstream if this line degrades? Why was this section of pipe relayed in March, but not logged until June? Donovan noticed. The first week passed in a kind of armed truce. The second week, Laurel started riding with Donovan when he did field assessments at the farms connected to the plant's water system. She saw the Harmon operation's 60 acres of peaches, fourth-generation Mrs. Harmon running it alone since her husband's stroke. She saw the Delacroix family's cornfields, where two brothers were hand-watering rows at 5 in the morning to stretch what remained in their storage tank. She saw a family named Pruitt, who had already sold half their equipment and were watching the other half with the expression of people calculating what they could afford to lose. Laurel had grown up in Atlanta. She understood agriculture as a sector yield, data commodity pricing, supply chain logistics. She had not previously understood it as a collection of specific families who had made specific bets on specific land and were now sitting with the consequences of a water infrastructure decision made in a conference room 400 miles away. She stopped going back to the hotel to work in the evenings. She started staying until the assessments were finished, however long that took. She did not announce this change or explain it. She just stayed. On the 8th day, a pump unit at the Harmon farm quit at 4 in the afternoon. It was not a catastrophic failure, just a seal that had been wearing for months and finally gave, but it was enough to take the whole station offline. Without it, the drip system feeding the east orchard had no pressure. Mrs. Harmon came out when she heard the silence and stood in her driveway with her hands on her hips, not panicking in the way of someone who had been through enough hard seasons to know that panicking didn't fix any of them. Donovan had the truck there in 20 minutes. Laurel was with him. They worked until dark. Donovan on his back under the pump, housing Laurel crouched beside the truck bed, handing him tools as he called for them. Adjustable wrench, half-inch socket, the flashlight, when the sun dropped. She didn't have his vocabulary for any of it, but she paid attention, and she was fast. And after the first 30 minutes, he stopped explaining what each tool was for and just called for it by name. When the pump came back online and they heard the lines pressurize and the drip heads start clicking across the orchard, Mrs. Harmon appeared from the porch with sweet tea and 2 chairs. She set them down in the gravel, looked at both of them with the quiet warmth of someone who doesn't waste words on people who haven't earned them, and went back inside. They sat. Laurel's blazer was folded over the truck door. There was grease on her forearm she hadn't bothered wiping off. The tree line was going dark, and the air had finally dropped below 90. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "The controller. Why didn't you file for a patent?" Donovan was quiet for a moment. He turned the flashlight over in his hands. "I started building it about 4 months after Renee died," he said. "I wasn't sleeping. I needed something for my hands to do at 2 in the morning that wasn't just sitting in the kitchen." He paused. "A patent attorney wasn't exactly where my head was at." She didn't say she understood. She didn't say she was sorry in the reflexive way people offered it when they didn't know what else to do. She was quiet, which was better. "What was her name?" she asked. "Your wife." "Renee." She nodded slowly. "What would Renee think?" she said, "if she knew the system she watched you draw on the kitchen table was about to irrigate an entire county?" Donovan didn't answer right away. He looked out at the orchard where the drip heads were clicking steadily in the dark. He exhaled slowly through his nose. It was the first time in a long time that someone had said Renee's name, and it hadn't felt like a wound. He wasn't ready to name what it felt like instead. "Your turn," he said. Laurel looked at him. "You've been asking questions for 2 weeks. About the farms, the pipes, the families. You haven't said much about yourself." She considered that. "My father had a cardiac event during a board meeting," she said. "November of last year, mid-sentence during a budget presentation. He was taken out by ambulance and the board needed signatures on 3 pending items before close of business." She looked at her hands. "I was in the room. I was the only family present, so I signed. And became CEO. Without planning to, without a transition period, without anyone being particularly confident I was the right choice, including me." She set her tea down. "I spent the next 11 months making every decision as fast as possible so no one would have time to question whether I should be making it at all." Donovan looked at her directly. "That's why you signed my termination in 15 minutes. It wasn't an accusation. It was just the shape of the thing stated plainly." "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. The strongest person I ever knew stopped before every hard decision and asked herself whether she was actually right. Sat with it until she knew. He paused. "That was Renee, and I never once thought she was weak." Laurel didn't respond immediately. She picked up her tea and looked at the orchard and let the statement be what it was. After a while, she said, "Thank you for not letting me off the hook." "I'm not," he said. "But you did drive to a farm in Cedar Ridge in heels to tell a man you wronged that you were wrong. That's not nothing." They sat until Mrs. Harmon's porch light came on, then drove back toward town in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The crisis came faster than the forecast predicted. By the 3rd week of July, the reservoir outside Cedar Ridge had dropped to its lowest recorded level since 1988. The county issued a Stage 3 water restriction. The Agricultural Extension Office sent notice to every registered farm in the area. At current depletion rates, available irrigation water would last approximately 14 days. Donovan brought the prototype controller out of the storage shed on the Booker farm and mounted it to the test infrastructure on 2 acres of the Harmon orchard. He connected it to the town's water coordination network the same way he'd been testing it all spring, patched through the municipal grid straight to the reservoir gate controls. The system read soil moisture at 6-inch and 12-inch depths and adjusted delivery in real time, less water overall, but delivered precisely when and where the soil needed it. In the first 3 days of testing, the East Orchard used 31% less water than the previous week and showed no measurable stress in the foliage. Donovan showed Laurel the numbers on a Thursday evening on his porch. She looked at them for a long time. "This works for any crop," she said. "Any crop with sensor compatibility, which is most of them." She looked up. "Donovan, there are 47 communities in the Southeast right now under water restriction. The Central Valley, the Texas Panhandle." "I know. We need to deploy this." "I know that too." He folded the printout. "But I need my name on it. Not Graham's project file, not Bennett Agricultural. Mine." "Done," she said without hesitation. 3 days later, Laurel stood in front of the Cedar Ridge Community Center and said clearly and on record, the irrigation system was the intellectual property of Donovan Booker. The project file opened under Graham Pike's name had been created fraudulently. Donovan would lead the deployment as project director. The patent would be filed in his name, and Bennett Agricultural would be a partner, not an owner. The room was not uniformly convinced. Some people applauded. Some looked at Graham, who stood near the back with his arms crossed, and a stillness that was different from calm. Donovan watched Graham from the front of the room and understood what that stillness meant. He had just become the single largest threat to everything Graham had spent 20 years building. And Graham had already shown once exactly what he was willing to do when he felt cornered. The sabotage came on a Tuesday night. One of the 3 test pump stations, the unit feeding the Delacroix cornfields, went offline at 11 p.m. By morning, a section of irrigation line had overpressurized and split, and water had run across 2 acres of planted rows, flattening corn that was 3 weeks from harvest. The Delacroix brothers were standing in the field when Donovan arrived. The older one looked at him with something harder than anger, the specific look of a man who has been hurt twice by the same situation and is deciding whether trust is something he can still afford. Donovan said nothing defensive. He crouched down in the mud and started tracing the line. Graham had worked through the night. He modified the plant's access logs to show Donovan's key card used at the pump station at 10:47 p.m. He also retrieved the portable camera unit he'd used in the original incident, repositioned now near the equipment corridor, and extracted a clip showing someone of Donovan's build entering the pump area at the relevant hour. The face wasn't visible. It didn't need to be. He submitted both the log and the clip to the board via email before 8 a.m., copying 3 members of the audit committee and attaching a statement suggesting that Laurel's professional judgment had been compromised by personal attachment to the project's director. The board scheduled an emergency session for Friday. 2 days before that, the bank's final notice arrived at the Booker farm. 31 days past due on the operating loan. Foreclosure proceedings would begin within 72 hours if the balance was not resolved. Donovan found the notice on the kitchen table when he got home. Mila was sitting there doing homework. He could tell from her face that she had already read it. She was 9 and she could read, and no one had thought to put it somewhere she wouldn't find it. He sat down across from her. "Are we losing the house?" she asked. "I don't know yet," he said. He had decided long ago that he would not lie to her about the things that mattered. She nodded once and went back to her homework. That evening, he found her room half reorganized in a way that suggested she had started sorting what was important enough to keep close. Laurel came to the farm that night. She said she could cover the loan, a personal transaction, no conditions attached. "No," Donovan said. "Donovan, I said no." He kept his voice level. "You pay off my debt and there's something between us that isn't what either of us wants between us. I don't want to owe you. I don't want you to have given me something I can't give back. I'm not asking you to give it back. I know you're not, that's why I can't take it." She looked at him with the expression of someone who wanted to argue and knew she was wrong to. "Then what do we do?" she said. "We find proof." He sat down at the kitchen table and put his hands flat on the surface. "Graham connected with a buyer for the design before I was ever terminated. That money moved through something. Your credentials still give you access to the financial records. I need you to use them. If the board finds out I'm pulling records on the plant manager without a formal order, they've already decided I'm guilty," he said, "and they're about to decide you made an error in judgment. The question isn't what happens if you look. The question is what happens if you don't." She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the peach trees stood in rows in the dark, still and patient. "All right," she said. "I'll look." Friday's board session suspended Laurel's authority pending an internal investigation. The motion passed 4-2. Graham Pike was appointed interim director of Cedar Ridge operations. His first action was a stop work order on the irrigation project. His second was contact with a commercial agricultural technology firm in Dallas about the purchase of an unlicensed design. His third, executed at 2 in the morning from his own device, using administrator credentials he'd held onto after the access restructure 2 months prior, was a lockout command sent to the reservoir's main control gate. Nobody announced the lockout. The automated alerts went to a monitoring account that Graham had quietly redirected to his personal email 8 days earlier. Donovan's phone rang at 4 a.m. It was Travis calling from the plant parking lot. "Something's wrong with the gate readings," Travis said. "The control gate's showing locked. I can't get a manual override from here. I need someone with site clearance." "Who else have you called?" "Nobody. I called you first." Donovan was already pulling on his boots. By 6 a.m., the Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Department had picked him up at the plant gate on Graham's instruction on the strength of a surveillance clip showing a figure near the control gate access point at 2:13 a.m. The clip was dark. The figure's face obscured the footage processed through software Graham had purchased 6 weeks earlier and installed on the monitoring system without documentation. Donovan was held for questioning. Laurel, stripped of her CEO authority, sat in a rented room above the Cedar Ridge hardware store with a laptop and credentials that still worked because IT had not yet processed the board's suspension order. She pulled every financial record she had authorization to view. She cross-referenced Graham's project file creation dates against the company communication logs. She found the consulting agreement. She found the wire transfer $60,000 from a Dallas-based technology holding company dated 9 days before Donovan was terminated. Graham hadn't been waiting for an opportunity. He had manufactured one, and he had been paid to do it before Donovan ever walked into the plant on his last morning of work. Outside, the August sun was already climbing above 90. The reservoir gate was still locked. The farms of Cedar Ridge were waiting for water that was not coming. Laurel drove to the Booker farm at 7 in the morning with her laptop and the wire transfer documentation and no clear plan beyond the next hour. Mila answered the door. She was dressed and had clearly been awake for some time. She looked at Laurel with her father's brand of assessment, the kind that took stock without broadcasting what it found. "They took him," Mila said, not a question. "Yes." "Did he do what they said?" "No." Mila stepped back from the door. "Then come in." The kitchen table was covered in Donovan's notebooks, diagrams, and handwritten sensor calibration notes. Mila moved them aside without being asked and stood at the counter watching Laurel open the laptop in the steady way of a child who understood that the most useful thing she could do right now was stay present and stay out of the way. Laurel walked her through what she had found. The consulting agreement, the wire transfer, the timeline that placed Graham's contact with the Dallas firm 9 days before Donovan's termination. Mila listened without interrupting. When Laurel finished, she said, "The control gate lockout. You know it wasn't my dad's card, right? Because the prototype logs every command that goes through the coordination network." Laurel looked up. "Dad connected the prototype to the town grid last spring," Mila said. "And he patched it through my tablet so I could track the field data for school rainfall, soil moisture, gate inputs, all of it. The tablet stores everything locally, even when we're offline." She went to the counter and picked up a battered tablet in a rubber case. "It's been logging every command to the system since April, including whoever sent the gate lockout last night." She handed it to Laurel. The log was time-stamped. At 2:11 a.m., a gate lockout command had been transmitted to the reservoir control system. The device ID on the command was not Donovan's phone. It was not the plant's monitoring terminal. It matched the mobile ID registered to a company-issued tablet currently assigned to the interim director of Cedar Ridge operations. Graham had locked the gate from his own device. Laurel photographed every screen. Then she called Sheriff Roy Callahan directly. He sat on the county water management board, and she had his number from 2 conversations in the past 3 weeks. She told him what she had, clearly without preamble. The reservoir gate was still locked. The temperature outside was already climbing toward 100, and she needed him at the facility in 30 minutes. He said he would be there in 20. Graham had anticipated that Laurel would eventually reach the financial records. What he had not anticipated was the tablet, because he hadn't known it existed. His plan for Saturday morning was to reach the reservoir control building, clear the digital log from the gate system, and take the offline controller hardware with him. The last physical connection between his device and the lockout command. After that, everything pointed to Donovan's card in the plant log, Donovan's build on the corridor footage, and a pattern any prosecutor would call self-evident. He was 50 yards from the control building entrance when the sheriff's cruiser came down the access road. He ran for his truck. Travis had locked the equipment gate on Laurel's instruction, and Graham covered approximately 40 feet of gravel before the road ended at a chain-link barrier and a second cruiser coming around the south perimeter. He got out with his hands visible and said nothing. For the first time, he looked like a man who had run out of prepared responses. At the county station, Donovan was told he was free to go at 8:42 a.m. He called Laurel from the lobby. "The gate's still locked," she said. "Graham killed the digital controls before he left the building last night. The override panel is down." Donovan was already walking toward the exit. "Manual operation, only from the machine room inside the dam. Travis says the access shaft is in the northeast corner of the lower structure. He also says the room hasn't been inspected in 2 years and the wall seals are compromised." "I flagged that room in a maintenance report 8 months ago," Donovan said. "Graham closed the ticket without action." A pause on the line. "The heat index hits 107 by noon," she said. "I know." He pushed through the door into the morning. "Get Travis to the gate housing. Have him monitor pressure from outside. I need a radio signals bad in the lower structure. I'll have one waiting. He reached the parking lot. The sky was white with heat. Somewhere on the south side of Cedar Ridge, the Harmon Orchard was waiting. The Delacroix corn was waiting. 8 families whose names he now knew were waiting. He got in the truck and drove. The machine room was 22 steps below ground level, accessed through a steel door in the northeast corner of the dam's lower maintenance corridor. The air was 15 degrees cooler than the surface and smelled of mineral water and old concrete. Donovan's work light moved in a single circle across the walls as he descended. The manual gate controls were a series of mechanical overrides installed in 1987, a backup system for power outages, never modernized. 3 primary valves, 2 bypass levers, a pressure equalization handle that had to be operated in sequence, or the gate housing risked a surge capable of damaging the downstream pipe network. Donovan had read the original engineering specification for this system once, 8 months ago when he was drafting the maintenance report that Graham had dismissed. He was glad now that he had read it carefully. "I'm in," he said into the radio. Laurel's voice came back with the slight compression of a short-range channel. "Travis has eyes on the exterior pressure gauge. He'll call readings every 2 minutes." "Copy." He found the first valve by feel as much as by sight. A wheel handle the size of a dinner plate, corroded but not seized. He applied steady counterclockwise pressure and felt it give. A thin line of water appeared in a crack along the east wall. Not a rupture, a seep that had been there for years now responding to the change in pressure. He watched it for 10 seconds to confirm it wasn't spreading, then moved to the second valve. "Pressure holding at the exterior gauge," Laurel said. "Good." The second valve had torqued slightly over the years, and the first inch of rotation required both hands. He got it moving, held the position. Behind him, the seep widened. Water began running down the concrete in a thin sheet. He could hear the structure settling, not failing, just the slow adjustment of old material under new load. He had maybe 10 minutes before the space got genuinely dangerous. "Talk to me," he said into the radio. "Exterior pressure rising." Her voice was steady, not the absence of concern, but the decision to put it somewhere it couldn't interfere with what needed doing. "Travis says consistent with controlled increase. You're reading right." Third valve, pressure equalization handle. He worked through the sequence from memory. Valve 3, 1/4 turn. Equalization lever full counterclockwise. Hold for equilibration, then lever to center. The specification's original engineer had left a handwritten note at the bottom of page 4. This step took patience, and anyone who rushed it would regret it. Donovan counted to 40. The water on the east wall was running faster now, pooling at the base. A hairline appeared in the ceiling joint above the second valve that hadn't been there 5 minutes earlier. He moved the equalization lever to center. For a moment, nothing. Then from somewhere above and beyond the concrete, a low vibration, the sound of something large moving through a channel it had been blocked from. The pressure gauge on the wall swung clockwise. "Gates opening!" Travis's voice through the radio talking to Laurel. "I can see movement in the primary channel." Donovan exhaled. He walked back to the access shaft steadily, not running because the floor was wet, and the last thing Cedar Ridge needed was for him to slip on the way out. He climbed the 22 steps, pushed open the steel door, and stepped into the August morning. Laurel was standing 20 feet away. She had been standing there since she heard the gate open. She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at him the way people look at something they are relieved to still see. "Wall seep on the east side got wider," he said. "That room needs to be taken offline and properly repaired before winter." "I'll file the work order myself," she said. Down the access road through the open equipment gate, a silver line was moving along the first irrigation channel, water finding its way through the system, spreading toward the farms in the unhurried, inevitable way of water that has finally been given room to go where it needs to go. Graham Pike was charged with theft of intellectual property, willful destruction of infrastructure, fraud, and filing false incident reports. His attorney later presented his history, the farm his family had lost, the 20 years of work that never felt like enough, as context. The court acknowledged it and proceeded with sentencing regardless. The Dallas firm rescinded their agreement and issued a public statement within 48 hours of the arrest. Laurel's authority was formally reinstated 8 days later. The vote was 5-1. The dissenting member resigned the following week without comment. She stood before the full staff and the assembled community of Cedar Ridge, and she did not use the word miscommunication, and she did not say acting in good faith. She said Donovan Booker was terminated based on a report I did not investigate. I signed that termination in 15 minutes without speaking to one person who worked alongside him. That decision was mine. The error was mine. And I am saying it plainly and on record because the people in this room deserve to hear it said that way. Donovan received full back pay and formal compensation for the period of wrongful termination. He sat in the third row during her statement and looked at his hands. She offered him a senior position within Bennett Agricultural Director of Infrastructure Innovation Office in Atlanta, a team a budget. He thanked her and said no. What they built instead was called Booker Rural Systems, an independent company Donovan's name on the incorporation documents with a licensing agreement that allowed Bennett Agricultural to distribute the technology through its regional network. The patent was filed under Donovan Booker as sole inventor. Farms in Cedar Ridge received access at cost. 15% of net revenue was set aside for an operating fund for family farms in financial distress. The old processing plant was not closed. Over the following 8 months, it was converted into a rural technical training center, hydraulics, irrigation, engineering systems maintenance, open to anyone in the county under 25 who wanted to learn a trade the region actually needed. The following August, Cedar Ridge held its Harvest Festival for the first time in 3 years without a water restriction notice in effect. Donovan brought Laurel back to the Route 9 diner on the Saturday of the festival. Inside, beside the register, sat a small wooden box with a hand-lettered card taped to the front, for anyone having a hard day. Donovan had built the box in March from scrap wood left over from a fence repair on the farm. He'd put the first 20 in himself. Laurel looked at it for a moment, then opened her wallet and added a bill without being asked. "Your card works fine today," Donovan said. She looked at him sidelong. "Yours did too the first time." They found a booth near the window. Outside, the festival was underway, trucks in the lot, children running between vendor tables, the sound of a small town that has come through something and is choosing together to be glad about it. At the counter, an older man in a feed store cap handed his card to the cashier. The machine beeped. He looked down at the counter with the expression of someone calculating damage. The cashier reached for the wooden box, drew out a 20, and set it down without a word. No announcement, no ceremony, just the quiet, ordinary passing of something from one hand to the next. The man looked up. The cashier was already moving on. Mila, sitting across from her father with a menu she wasn't reading, watched the whole thing. She set the menu down. "Seems like your last $20 still hasn't been spent," she said. Donovan looked at the counter, then at Laurel, then back at his daughter, whose eyes were entirely her mother's. "No," he said. "I guess it hasn't." Outside the window, the peach orchards on the south end of Cedar Ridge were heavy with late fruit. The irrigation channels ran clear and steady between the rows. The water moved the way water moves when someone has finally built a system worthy of the land it serves, quietly, without interruption, finding everything that needed it, and not stopping until it got there. Donovan didn't give that 20 because he expected something back. He gave it because he knew what it felt like to need it, and he refused to let that feeling make him smaller. That's the thing about genuine kindness. It doesn't wait for a good day. It shows up on the hardest one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join us. We tell stories about people who chose to do the right thing when it cost them something, and those choices ended up changing everything. There are more coming. We'd love to have you here for them.